To add to that, I'm a policy and technical advisor for the CAV. I will now abbreviate it, otherwise I'll spend most of the 5 minutes just saying the title of where we are. But thank you very much for the invitation here, and thank you very much to the speakers we've already heard from, much better qualified than myself to be looking at the detailed science and research that we've got out there, but that is so key in influencing the policy decisions and helping us to navigate that change towards the outcomes that we wish to see. And my role in that, as I say, policy and technical advisor at the CAV. What is the CAV? I just thought it's probably worth just briefly mentioning who we are, what we do. So the CAV is a national specialist professional body. We've got just over 3,000 members. My role is to brief those members, and those members are what we refer to as our the trusted advisors that you will know perhaps referred to as land agents, chartered surveyors. Many of our members are dual qualified, and they are on the ground there talking to farmers. Our role is engaging with government, helping to create the best policy that we can that's actually going to work out on the ground for the objectives that we all want. And we then brief our members. Our members are out there also looking with farmers at the practical way in which we make this happen. As I say, agricultural value very much a trusted advisor to those farms, and really key in sort of the communication point that we've touched on today. I think they're really a key part of this process. So we've touched already, it was mentioned earlier about the policy and guidance, what we've seen. So that's the control of agricultural pollution regulations that we saw in 2021. I must admit, when I went into this job, I never realised how much I'd be talking about slurry. And I'm pleased to say it hasn't finished yet, and we're definitely not there. But I thought it's worth highlighting some of the areas within that policy. So it came through in transitional measures, so there are different time frames for when they must come forward. But some key ones to highlight, storage capacity for slurry and silage stores. We've heard that talked about already, but this is where you've got your point source solution. It's where we can identify where there's areas of solution that need addressing. But within that, there's so much guidance, and it's really important to highlight that, the guidance that's been out there, and the ways in which the guidance is trying to help farmers to achieve what we wish to achieve. We heard earlier about Northern Ireland, the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, really important, and I think quite a useful tool that many other devolved could learn from. Is it's helping to improve that data centre in which we can make those informed decisions. So not only for policymakers, but also for the farmers on the ground, that they're able to actually put what they're doing in practice into data to better make decisions that go forward. So within the control of agricultural pollutions regulations, as I say, there's particular things that have to be done. So that's your silage and slurry storage. There's rules on when spreading can occur. There's limits. We touched on the limit was mentioned earlier about the 170, and then the licence that could take you up to 250. One of the points I just thought was worth mentioning on the 250, one of the important things, it's not just, oh dear, I failed to reach the 170, well, I've got 250 to fall back on. The important part, if you are going for that licence, is to demonstrate that there is not going to cause a pollution incident by going above that. So that's where you're looking at the crop needs, the land needs, topography, and much of the other things that we'd have heard on about today, which affect that and the runoff. But what I think is really important to touch on is the need for infrastructure for this change. So when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about the slurry stores and the silage stores. There's a lot of infrastructure needed to improve these. Our statistics, when the 2021 regulations came out, there was only 4% of farms would actually have been reaching that 4 to 5 month capacity that's required by the legislation when it first came out. That's quite a terrifying figure when you're looking at the whole country. But this is a serious change that's needed, and a lot of funding that's required for this. There's, as we've touched on, farming is a very complex industry and different farming structures, but I think what's really key, and we've touched on, is policy and the funding that's there to help facilitate that change and to help improve that. We've seen the small grant scheme, that was up to 12,000 for a slurry or silage store. That's not going to do a huge amount. This was looking at covering, so you're not adding to the water levels within that, you're not adding rainwater into that to try and improve the storage capacity, but also the nutrient management investment scheme, which is in Wales. That was up to 50,000. I think the timing of when that was released was a little unfortunate. I think farmers didn't get a huge amount of warning it was there in a small window. So that was a little unfortunate because take up on that was very minimal. But I think it's things like those that we need to see increasing and more of them as we go forward. In England, they've had the slurry investment grant, which has been a much higher take-up, much more thought-through delivery of targeting specific industries to help improve their slurry stores and to help manage that change for farmers. So the grants are up to about 40% funding for much higher figures as well. So I thought my role in this, as I said, not touching on the detail of the science, is probably looking at the practical considerations that farmers will be looking at, but also land agents and our members are going to have to be considering when they're going to farmers. We've heard mentioning about stocking limits, but one of the issues with the 170 limit is the impact that has on the farming practice as it currently is. So an obvious one is stocking numbers. There are perhaps issues that need to be looked at with stocking numbers generally, but the effect that then has on viability just at the first offset. And as our members cover such a wide range of practice, it's also the other things that affects, such as farming structures. We've got landlords and tenant situations, the ability for that infrastructure to actually be carried out on the farm. Where's the funding coming from? Perhaps a collaborative approach between landlords and tenants to make that work, but it's really important to look at that. But also the other agreements this might see come forward. So that 170 limit is per hectare. So does that look at the requirement to bring in more land to help make that balance, to perhaps shift the sort of the impact of where perhaps it's livestock or perhaps it's arable, to improve that farming system and quite what that looks at. Obviously there's going to be unintended sort of consequences. There's going to be farms that are just not going to be able to cope with the change that's required, be that the level of infrastructure, or just perhaps it's the right time to move on, to allow somebody more productive to come onto the farm. When I say productive, I am not talking about the dreaded intensification. That's not what we mean by productivity. We're talking about the best practice for that land, the right person on the right land doing the right things. This is a balance of farming, environmental needs, other needs, infrastructure. There's high demand for development, for housing. The competition for land is very high. I've touched on it earlier, but just highlighting landlord and tenant issues. And then planning implications. I touched on the need for planning generally for development, for housing development being the obvious one, but there's renewables, there's sewage treatment plants, there's so much infrastructure that is required, and that competition for land is all on a limited area. We're not going to have more land, and so it's understanding the best places, the best use, and managing that. But also planning policy, meeting regulations, SAFOs, and also SUDS is another competition for land, sustainable drainage systems, important to mention, the nature-based solutions for drainage for planning development, which is a requirement in Wales, coming in elsewhere in the UK as well. But just briefly touching on other practical implications, we haven't heard too much about climate change in a way, and I just thought it was worth saying about climate change and adaptation, and I think adaptation being a key theme through this as well. And one of the points raised is buffering from year to year, so there's control of abstraction with abstraction licenses, quite sensibly so, and I think one of the recommendations is at a time of year when you've got incredibly high rainfall levels, perhaps it's a need to look at areas in which you can have a reservoir, store that water, make best use of that water. It's going to be helping with runoff issues and the rest, but also then when you're at other times of year where there's not enough water for all the requirements, be that irrigation or many other needs, it's the need to buffer from year to year, but also within a year. SACs, special areas of conservation. I just thought I'd touch, we've heard about the River Wye, but I just wanted to mention the Poole Harbour. That's another area where they've got a lot of work going on. They had a consent order due to the levels, the condition of the catchment. A lot of work ongoing there with the nutrient leaching tool, sort of similar to that we've seen under the 2021 regulations, but a lot more detail. I thought it was a useful example. I highly recommend having a look at it. Lessons to be learned. I think there's lessons to be learned throughout the UK, but that's just one to touch on. Yeah, welcome any questions, but I would iterate, I'll just quickly iterate and in summary, is that important role of communication and education as you're going through and understanding how we translate the science and the objectives that we all want to receive, to see, and how we best facilitate making that change and navigating that change with confidence, being able to go to farmers with confidence, with solutions. Perhaps that's pilots, giving examples of where things might work. That's data that can prove that it's a system that works, that you can go back to farmers and suggest those sorts of things. But thank you very much.